A golden era. An era marked by unprecedented excellence, success, and prosperity. It is a term you can hear pretty often when delving into conversations regarding gaming companies during the PS1 era. In fact, the console itself is seen by many as the golden era for gaming. Personally, I feel the PS2 generation saw the perfect mix of technology, financing, but also still enough creative freedoms, with games not being on the leash of massive budgets, inhibiting risk, leading to gaming sweet spot. But one company that I think this term can definitely apply to for that era is Squaresoft. So successful was the company that it isn't even universally agreed upon what the time frame of the era is. It is definitely agreed it contains Final Fantasy 7 to 9, but the point of its beginning can stretch back to Final Fantasy 6, and maybe even Secret of Mana the year before, and the end point can reach as far as Final Fantasy 10. Now, you may notice there was a lot of Final Fantasy being mentioned there, and that's because the franchise's golden era runs synonymous with the company's, which is a problem sometimes, when such periods of success are based off of one IP specifically. This will lead to others being sidelined and ignored as all focus is kept on the cash cow. This is a pretty well documented issue of the company at the time, and did lead to many people leaving to begin their own. And it is kind of a shame, since the 90s and early 2000s saw the creation of multiple interesting and more experimental titles that made use of the company's tentpole success to try something a bit different, like Xenogears, Vagrant Story, Bushido Blade, and today's subject. Released before the golden era really got going, coming out in 1994, Live Alive is a JRPG with the unique mechanic that rather than focusing on a continued narrative with a specific group of characters whose actions overlap and mesh into one another, it is different narratives with completely different characters who don't have any connection. The game was considered a commercial failure, selling 270,000 in Japan, which honestly isn't actually too bad for 1994. I mean, Earthbound was the 10th highest selling game in the country with 518,000. But unfortunately, it does very much pale in comparison to the more than 2.5 million of Final Fantasy VI. That franchise would notoriously become the stick that all other games at Square would be beaten with. The remake, released in 2022, is currently estimated to have sold around 500,000 copies, which is better, but it doesn't do justice to the notice the game deserves, especially right now. At a time when the company gets a fair bit of flack, particularly from fans who wanted to return a bit to how it was before. And Live Alive perfectly encapsulates what was being done right during that golden era. The game creates an interesting combination of battle systems that Square JRPGs had featured until this point, being a kind of mix between turn-based battling and the ATB battle system. Allies and enemies all have a visible charge bar, which upon reaching will begin their turn. Once their turn has commenced, other charge bars don't fill, as you now have the option to use an ability, an item, pause your turn, or just to wait to allow other charge bars to fill a little. Not that waiting was a command I ever used, because there's another way to pass time and fill charge bars, which is also extremely important for success. And that is by moving. Combat takes place on a kind of chessboard with participants being moved around in a tile-based manner. And moving is important, as enemy and ally abilities have specific ranges and directions that they work in. So there's a good bit of strategy involved in not just positioning yourself to be able to attack while avoiding enemy attacks, but also due to those enemy charge bars filling up as you move. If their bar is filled, but you aren't in the position for them to attack you, then their bar gets reset. So you can actually bait them into non-attacking and then wallop them when it's safe. And you can also lure them into following you into hazards. There are certain attacks which lay an element or status effect on a group of tiles, those being water, fire, poison, or electricity. And every few cycles, anyone on those tiles will be attacked by it. So you can actually have some fun and get them to kill their friends.
Victory!
But you must be careful, because those resistant to said element will actually be healed by it. Which gets us onto the other bit of strategy, vulnerabilities and resistances. Each attack has a specific type assigned to it, which is clearly indicated next to it. It is also easy to see what the enemy's weaknesses and vulnerabilities are, which of course would make one think it's very simple then, just keep spamming the super effective attacks. But it's not as simple as that. Firstly, those more effective attacks may require you to place yourself in the way of enemy attacks, but also because each attack indicates the damage assigned to it, and so it may be possible that even with it being weakened by resistance, a certain attack may still be more effective. And of course, you might just be in a situation where you don't have an attack that is especially effective. It also ties into another aspect which Live Alive does a lot better than its Final Fantasy counterpart. I've spoken before that in a lot of the older Final Fantasies, stat buffing and debuffing really isn't that effective. You need to use up a lot of turns for the benefits to actually pile up noticeably, when you could just be using those turns to do damage. But here, one stat drop or increase makes a very notable difference, so you are much more inclined to use these attacks. Particularly because they also usually do damage or heal alongside their stat effect. Now, of course, we are dealing with a JRPG here, which invariably leads to the standard issue you can get if you are a high enough level and have strong enough equipment. You will be in a position where you can withstand enemy attacks and ignore their resistance, so you can just spam the strongest attacks. But I do think it does do one or two things to stop battles from becoming too much of a slog or repetitive. Quite a few of the strongest attacks require charging. Upon selecting the attack, your charge resets before the attack is used, with stronger attacks requiring longer charge times. Obviously, this puts you in a vulnerable position, not just because you are giving the enemy multiple turns to hit you, but also because some attacks can interrupt your charge, something which you can do to enemies as well.
Trust in the phantasms. You do well to avoid this. How that feel?
They can also just move out of the way while you're charging, leading to you just missing. Other powerful attacks will leave you significantly debuffed after doing them, or have very unique radiuses needing you to position yourself correctly. It also helps that battles aren't too long, so you won't feel a tedious repetition too much. But the best remedy for preventing tiresome combat is the game's best aspect. As I referred to at the beginning, the game is broken up into 7 different stories with different characters in different time periods. You are free to choose which one you want to start with, from prehistoric, Imperial China, Edo Japan, the present day, the Wild West, the near future, and the far future. You can also start a chapter, leave, and return to where you left off if you weren't vibing at a certain point. But that shouldn't be such a problem, since they aren't that long anyway. Now, it would be easy to create these 7 chapters and be done with it. I mean, making 7 different narratives with their own characters, designs, and environments is a fair bit of creativity already. But there is also a good deal of effort to make them play differently. Some definitely more than others, to be fair, but each chapter does do something unique. Okay, I'm going to go into explaining how, which will invariably lead me to talking about narrative as well. So let's just say, spoiler warning for the rest of the video from this point. Alright, let's get to talking about the chapters in the order I played them. First, Imperial China. This is one of the more combat focused chapters, which makes sense for one being based around a martial artist. You are an old martial artist who is looking for a successor. So he goes out to find 3 options he will then choose to give the most attention to for training.
Old man.
I will find a way to put that in every video going forward. You will have 3 occasions where you can choose which one to train, with 4 sessions available each time. The one who gets the most attention will be the one you must finish the chapter with. Next, I moved on to the far future, and a far cry from the combat focus of the previous. You play as a newly created robot whose owner can't decide on a good name for him, so I assisted by dubbing him Billy Big Balls. You are stationed on a cargo spaceship which is transferring a creature to another planet. But as can be completely predicted, after a shot of the very alien looking sleeping pod room, the creature breaks free. And the whole chapter becomes essentially a mystery visual novel, where you need to attempt to contain the creature while figuring out who's responsible for its release. And also to resist the temptation to shoot yourself out of the airlock. Oh no! The world will be deprived of big balls. Gameplay presents itself in you needing to follow dialogue and read the provided map to determine where to go next, while occasionally needing to avoid the free-roaming creature. Though I will say, I was disappointed by how easy it was to avoid. It would have been better if it was more of a presence that you need to continuously evade while moving around. Instead, it only shows up as a kind of set piece after specific story beats and in specific locations. I mean, there's an entire network of ventilation shafts, but there's no reason to be in them. Overall though, I do really like the change up. Next up, I went to the Wild West. I'm not someone who's really that into this kind of setting, which I realise as someone who loves Wild Arms, that doesn't make much sense. But anyway, I wasn't really looking forward to it. But I really liked this one. You arrive in a town being harassed by a bandit gang, and after getting involved, they plan on attacking in the morning, and so you need to prepare. This results in the gameplay being that you are given a time limit to run around the town and find items that can be used for setting traps. But it's not just about finding the items. You also need to select which members of the town will set the traps for you, with some working faster than others, with you obviously needing to decide which ones you're going to use, your decisions being based off of how they act during the opening cutscenes and the things they say. The number of traps you've laid and which ones will determine how many enemies are taken out in the opening assault, and so how many you need to fight in the final battle of the chapter. A fun short one where your actions have a clear impact on what happens at the end. On to the prehistoric era, which again is one of the more combat based ones, where you are a caveman who wants to get his groove on with a lady who gets abducted, so you go off to bash everyone in the way. But there is a unique aspect, and that is random encounters for your grinding purposes need to be found. If you press a button, Pogo, our caveman protagonist, will sniff out the area. This will produce clouds which allow you to track where enemies are and also find hidden items. And there are also times where it will be used to help you figure out where to go in the narrative. I did really like this one, but more so for something we'll get onto in a little bit. For now, we'll move on to my least favourite chapter, predominantly because I didn't really vibe with its plot, but it probably is also the least interesting gameplay wise. You are Akira, an orphan who has the ability to read minds. The city he is living in is having an issue where a biker gang is abducting people as part of a larger conspiracy. Yes, there is a character named Akira, and there's biker gangs, and people who have psychokinetic powers. My mind also very quickly had the same thought.
Look at that.
As I said, I didn't find this too interesting. You can use the mind reading to get some extra conversations, and it is also sometimes needed for plot progression, but it is really obvious when you need to use it. Otherwise, it has the feature of having an overworld map in your Dragon Quest sense, which serves as a means of connecting between various locations. There are also two other smaller features which has something unique. You have a robot partner who doesn't level up just by fighting. You need to give him enhancements and equipment to have new moves. And kind of related to that, there's also a crafting mechanic. Something which the prehistoric chapter also has, but in that one, you combine two items together to get a new one. Here, it is much worse, as you just give the professor random items and hope that he might make something new with them. You do also get to fight with a giant robot at the end, to be fair, but this one wasn't really for me. Fortunately, the present day chapter was my next one, and it was great. You are a martial artist who wants to be the top boy, and so you have to fight a series of fighters, and while doing so, bait them into using specific moves which you can then learn and add to your moveset. This was already a cool feature, but I also really like how it was presented. Rather than have a navigatable world like the others, it is done in a Street Fighter style, where you select your opponent and they even give you a little speech before and after you fight them. I just think this was such a cool little variation on the core means of how you would normally get to a fight in this type of game. And my final chapter in Edo, Japan was great as well. You are a ninja, because of course you are in a video game set in Edo, Japan, and you have been tasked with breaking into the keep of a warlord and rescuing a prisoner. This one is probably the most free form of the chapters in terms of how you can tackle it. You can just slice and dice your way through, but there is actually another way to do it as well. You can actually go invisible and sneak your way past enemies, and then find multiple ways to enter the keep and stealth your way up the building. So again, another really good variation. A regular feature present throughout Live Alive, ensuring that gameplay doesn't get boring or overstay its welcome. And even if you aren't enjoying a specific chapter, they aren't really long enough to become too much of a drag anyway. And also helped by the way it's wrapped up and given to you. This game looks great. For obvious reasons, Square became predominantly known for their CGI and 3D graphics, but that neglects that they were masters of graphics in the pixel art and 2D form as well. Something you see here in the 2D HD remake. I've seen that there are people complaining about the prevalence of this graphic style after the announcement of Octopath Zero, but I don't really get that. There really isn't that many games. It's not like the mud filter of the new gen era or the bloom filter obsession we had. Anyway, I really like it, but it's not just about the quality of the graphics. It's the use of them in portrayal of tone and narrative. I mentioned in my Final Fantasy V video about the expressive nature of pixel sprites and how good Square was at exploiting it. And here is another fine example, best exemplified in the prehistoric chapter. Obviously, being cavemen, nobody in this chapter can speak, so all plot and communication is displayed through animations and facial expressions. And not only does it communicate narrative and gameplay mechanics effectively, it also creates some really great physical comedy. Pretty much every cutscene in this chapter left a smile on my face with the interactions between Guri and Pogo. I absolutely hate fart jokes, but even I found this funny. And of course, the other part of presentation that you will always expect a Square game to have nailed is music. And the norm resumes here. I mean, it's Yoko Shimomura, so of course it would. It wasn't the biggest soundtrack. Most chapters usually have like 3 tracks created for them, but they fit their vibes perfectly, and the boss battle music is an absolute banger. And always is built up to perfectly.
Quell this moment as I, Odeio, unveil to you the noble visage of he who will rule Japan forevermore! Ah! Mine! All is...
So, we've spoken about the boxes that Golden Era Square would tick off. An enjoyable core combat system, slight tweaks and twists to gameplay to apply variation, and great presentation. But there's still a big one we need to get onto. I think we can agree that these 7 chapters are portraying very simplistic plots. The prehistoric plot is basically rescuing a damsel in distress. China is a pretty standard martial arts story of a mentor avenging his pupils. Japan is overthrowing a warlord infested with demonic entities. The Wild West is an outsider helping a town with a bandit problem. Present day is about a guy wanting to be the world's strongest. The near future is a little bit more complex, about a conspiracy to bring back a godly entity. Let's be honest, that's quite easily a relatively standard anime plot. And the far future is basically a mix of Alien and Space Odyssey, with a creature running free on a spaceship, and the other part of it, I don't really want to spoil, given it's supposed to be a mystery plot, but I do kind of realize that by mentioning Space Odyssey, I think it's a little bit obvious. Anyway, all pretty standard narratives done many times before, but executed well, giving us fun, or at least pretty interesting characters which use their narrative and setting to set up the gameplay style that will be present in that chapter. However, then something changes. After you finish your 7th chapter, a new one unlocks, set in the Middle Ages. And it also begins in a very standard manner. You are Orsted, the coolest, most bestest and belovedest knight in the kingdom, and so get to marry the king's daughter. But of course, she gets yoinked away by the Dark Lord, and so you must go save her. Very standard for a medieval setting. And the gameplay goes with that as well. We have returned to the classic JRPG style where random encounters take place just by walking on tiles. We then start getting a change as we progress the plot though. We reach the Dark Lord's lair and fight him, but it turns out it's a false imitation and you need to escape as the place around you crumbles. After returning to the kingdom, you are tricked into killing the king and forced to flee. And upon finally confronting the Dark Lord, we discover it has actually become our ally, who has had enough of the protagonist getting all the acclaim and being completely ungrateful for it. Then when he is defeated, his soon-to-be wife turns against him as well, and he is left completely alone. As a result, he becomes hateful of the entire world, and so becomes the Dark Lord himself. It's very Shakespearean, and not just because everyone dies. Well, I mean that is part of it, but also in the way that a character's status and acclaim is used to create his own downfall. And I do think they were going for that. Everyone speaks in a kind of thespianish prose, which I will admit is sometimes a bit clunky, but does fit in with the story. However, we are not done yet, as we now move on to the final chapter. You must pick someone from the previous chapter to start with, and we cut to their ending cutscene where they get ripped away and end up in a void. We then discover that you have been transported to the medieval world, but now under the control of Odio, the Dark Lord. Upon confronting him, your attention is drawn to the fact that every boss you have fought has had a name which is some variation on his, pushing you to the realization that this isn't just a collection of slice of life adventures. They are all tied together into a common theme and commentary. A commentary of a fight that we as a species and society have been engaged in throughout history. A fight against hatred, jealousy, and spite. It is hinted at for each chapter, with some talking about it more explicitly, and others ending with people coming together or putting their differences aside. But at the end here, it all comes together in a well-executed conclusion. Punctuated even more by how the remake added a little bit more, how you need to obtain the conclusion. You will fight Odio, and win, well, hopefully, and once you have done so, you will have the opportunity to beat down on Orsted. If you do so, you will receive an ending, but clearly not a very satisfying one. Instead, you must leave him, at which point he will chase you down. And I think that this is a pretty effective for conveying the point. You respond to his challenge that your drive and goals have been based in selfishness and greed, based in the same grounding as the hate and spite that encompasses him, by displaying a simple act of mercy. But importantly, you still have to fight him, showing that hatred will still have to be combated to be truly done away with.
Seek you a strategy guide at wit's end, but not before I'd first try this and that.
And this is a key feature of Golden Era Square games. They were grounded on this foundation of setting up an easily accessible premise which allows you to connect with the characters and the gameplay mechanics, getting you into the experience before getting the plot too convoluted. Final Fantasy VII starts off with the evil Shinra company being bad, and then we need to stop the bad Sephiroth before we get into anything too more convoluted. Chrono Trigger starts with the relatively straightforward premise of getting warped back in time and needing to save a princess before it gets into all its intricate time jumping. Even as late as Final Fantasy X, you would see the formula. An isekai type of situation with escorting a pilgrimage before it launches off to more. That's the template. A core groundwork to get the player into it, and then you can go on your merry way with all the complications. Another good example of this can be seen via a release from this year, Clair Obscur. I don't think the game was the absolute masterpiece that quite a few people have been lauding it as, but I did really enjoy it. And it did the same thing. The first two acts follow an easily understandable and straightforward plotline. Every year, a new age of people are wiped out by the Paintress, and so we're going to go over and stop her from doing that. There are occurrences and characters along the way who hint at something more, but they don't derail this core goal. Rather, they add an encouragement to complete the goal, as presumably the mysteries around them will be resolved along with this core aim. And so, we get to focus on gameplay and characters, which allows for those later reveals and twists to have more impact. I'll be honest, I'm not really sure how to end this video. My original urge was to go on a screed about modern Square Enix. But not only am I pretty tired of doing that, I don't really want to be negative when talking about something which gave me such a positive experience. I'll be honest, again, and say that I haven't really been in a good frame of mind this year. Particularly when it comes to media and entertainment, I haven't really gotten too much joy out of things like games or film. Now, the one advantage is that I've gotten back into reading, but the disadvantage, well, I think that's obvious. But Live Alive was a fantastic experience that I enjoyed, from the gameplay to the isolated plot per chapters and to the overarching connectedness revealed at the end. If we do have to do remasters, then these are the games we should be doing them for. Well-made games that have perhaps fallen through the cracks and so aren't as accessible nowadays. not games that are so popular that they get a port or enhanced edition every generation that you can now buy them on every platform that's ever existed. But I'm veering negative again. Live Alive is a great time. Play it.